the angels did say was to certain poor shepherds in fields where they lay, in fields where they lay, keeping their sheep on a cold winter's night that was so deep. Noel, 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 born is the King of Israel. King of Israel. And by the light of that same star, 3 wise men came from the country afar to seek for a king was their intent, and to follow the star wherever it went. Noel, 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 born is the King of Israel. This star drew nigh to the northeast over Bethlehem. It took its rest, and there it did stop and stay right over the place where Jesus lay. Noel, 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 born is the King of Israel.
Noel, oh, Rhoda Weaver, that is beautiful, and Richard Shulman, and our Unity Band, thank you. Thank you, each and every one. We want to welcome you again this morning, and we want to talk about love. You know, that word love is used for so many things, from, oh, I love my toast that way, to I love you with all my heart, to I love the God of my being. And what is the spirit of love, the Advent spirit of love? You know, if we talk about the traditional Christian Christmas story, it's really a blending of 2 stories. If you look at the Gospels of Matthew and the Gospel of Luke, you'll find parts of the story, you'll find some differing things, but we blend those together sort of in a coalesced way. We make it all fit, and we call it the Christmas story. And you'll recognize many of the characters and the story content. We want to show you a picture of that familiar scene that we call the Nativity. Familiar things. You recognize the inn. You recognize Mary and Joseph, and of course baby Jesus. You recognize the sheep and the shepherds and the wise men, the star, the town of Bethlehem. But today, I want to talk about what's often overlooked and left out of the story, or not included, I should say, even though it shows up in both gospel accounts, even though it shows up really throughout what we call the Christmas story, even though it shows up over 365 times. That's an interesting number. It shows up over 365 times throughout the Bible. What gets left out are 2 very important words. These words are a clear, essential directive 2 words that are spoken by Gabriel, 2 words that are spoken by the angels, these heavenly messengers, or what we could call messengers of truth. These 2 words that are spoken that are the most frequent directive given in all of the scriptures. And so what are those 2 words? Well, many of you have probably figured it out. They are fear not. Fear not, Mary. Fear not, Joseph. Fear not to the shepherds. Fear not to Zechariah. It seems like the angels really understand that fear is a natural initial response or an impulse in human beings. It's a normal part of the human experience. The angels seem to know that the primal reactionary state of the separate self is fear. I want to say that again. The primal reactionary state of the separate self is fear. And so the angels know, this inner voice of truth knows that we need to be reminded over 365 times every day of the year almost, we need to be reminded to fear not, which in today's words maybe don't, or would be do not be afraid. Don't let yourself be afraid. We could say don't let fear scare you away and miss out on your blessing. Don't let fear hold you back and miss out on what's happening here. And the other thing is the angels know they can't stop there. It's not just fear not, but it's always followed by a faithful action. And it's an action that is an action of an expression of love in action, truth in action. So fear not, coupled with and followed by faithful action that will be love and truth in action. And so fear not is the ultimate call, if you will, of the Christmas story, of our story. Why? Well, because fear not, if we let fear get in the way, we're going to miss out on what is that we're being called into. You see, a lot of people, if you say, what is the opposite of love? Most people, and we might say hate. But I want you to consider this, that the opposing energy to love is actually fear. If you really think about it, fear is the breeding ground. Fear breeds all things that create separation, that create enemies, that create hate. And so the opposite of love is really fear. That it's fear that causes us to close off, to shut down, to armor up. It's fear that gives rise to confusion, to greediness, to egoism, to divisiveness, resentment, anger, destructive behaviors that constitute and can give rise to hatred. And so the opposing energy, or the greatest resistance to love then, is fear. And that's why in the Bible the scripture says that perfect love cast away all fear. That you see, love is made perfect through our expressing it. It comes to perfection as it is expressed. And that's not only found in the Christian and the Judaic scriptures. In Buddhism, the Buddhists teach that it says, fear finds its most fertile ground in those who lack love. In the Hindu tradition, love is seen really as a shield, if you will, that the energies of fear cannot penetrate if we have really anchored ourselves in ways of being that constitute and bring forth love. And if God is love, then we are love. And we're here to learn to love this creative presence, God. To love our neighbor, and who is our neighbor but any other. And we're here to really learn to love ourselves. So today when we talk about love, I want to approach it from this direction, that learning to fear not is learning to love. That learning to fear not, do not be afraid, to such an extent that it causes you to shut down, to go numb, to create enemies, to miss your blessing. Fear not, and allow love to lead you into the experience and expression of all that you are, and to really understand what is your nature beyond just this physical being, what we call the Christ nature, and we'll get to that a little bit. I love poetry from some of the mystics from years ago. There's a writer by the name of Hafiz that was in the 14th century. And Hafiz wrote, "The subject tonight is love, and for tomorrow night as well. As a matter of fact, I know of no better topic for us to discuss until we die." Now, Hafiz, in his poetic writings, he used a lot of different words to point to and to describe what he called God. He had many names for God. He referred to God as the beloved, the friend, the clever rascal. He referred to God as the problem giver and the problem solver. He called God the immediate one, but like Jesus and the Hebrew prophets, most often Hafiz called God love. And Jesus, if you look at the summation of his teachings and of his life, what he really taught was that our capacity to demonstrate love was the purpose of our life, and that the true measure of a spiritual life or of a religious life was to embody the spirit of the law. He was always pointing out it's not the letter of the law that you have to master. It is yourself that needs mastery so that the love that you are can come forth. He taught to love God, to love the other, and to love ourselves. And that the true measure of one's life is how much love did you embody? How much love did you radiate? In the final days of Jesus' life, in the writings that are sometimes referred to as his final discourse, where Jesus called together those closest to him, his companions, the ones that were his students, and he basically said, I don't call you disciples or students or servant or staff. I call you friend, because I've not held anything back from you. I haven't held back or left anything out. He said, I've shared everything that I am, everything that I have, and everything that I know. That there are no secrets, there are no advanced methods. So what I leave with you is how I have related to you. What I leave with you is how I have related to God, Abba. What I leave with you is how I have related to all others. And so what I leave with you is the essential commandment, and that is to love. He said, love as you've seen me love. Love as you've seen me relate to others. With love, with God. You've seen me relate to others as love, as God, for God is love. He went on to say that people will know you're following me and following God by your love. And so that was echoed in 1 John 4:12 when the writer said, no one has ever seen God, but if we love each other, God lives in us, and God's love is brought to full expression in and through us. And so that was the message of Jesus. Take me and my life as your example. You know, he said it's easy to love those who love you. It's easy to love those whom you agree with, but what merit is in that? He said, how do you love toward those that would be your enemy? How do you love toward those who despitefully use you? How do you love toward those who are unlike you and unkind to you? That is where the practice is. That is where you come to discover a love that is bigger. And that's the love that we're talking about, because that love is an aspect of our essential being that is bigger than you may know yourself to be, that is more than in its existence than you may know yourself to be. And so it's about learning to love when we would shut down. As I was thinking about this week, I was reminded of a memory that came to me a few years ago when I was just sitting quiet in meditation. I had a sweet memory When I was a little kid, I would wake up often at night and I would have somehow been sleeping on my arm and my hand would be completely numb. I couldn't feel it. And as a little kid, I was terrified, so I'd cry out in the darkness, "Mama!" And my mom would come to my room and she'd say, "What's wrong?" And I'd say, "My hand is missing. My hand is gone." And she'd say, "No, honey, your hand is asleep. You were laying on it." "No, I can't feel it. My hand is missing. My hand is gone." And she would get me up out of the bed and we'd walk into the hallway where she would sit on the hallway floor and hold me in her lap. By then the feeling had started to come back, but she would begin to massage my hand. And the feeling would come back. And when I remembered that in a time of meditation, and I just felt that love of a mother, that love that cares for us, what I realized was, when I was cut off from being able to feel something, when I felt separated from my hand, when I was in pain, she took it to the light. She tended to what was hurting and what I thought was missing so that the blood could flow again, so that the love could flow again. Do you see the power in that? That many times in our life we're crying out, we're hurting, we're suffering in differing degrees, but at the base of it, it's because we've become disconnected, that the flow has somehow become impeded, crimped, or cut off. And we need to find a way to take those fears and those hurts and those things that we don't understand, to take them to the light. And in the light, to tend and befriend the things that are causing us pain, the things that we think are missing. We take it to the light. We need to tend and befriend. And then the love will flow. The blood will flow. It will flow naturally again. You see, sometimes we say, well, I wish I could have love, or I wish I could give love. But really, the love that we're talking about is not something you get or give, because you are love. That it is something that we can nurture and allow. It's something that we express as we learn to fear not. That to really understand and open to the presence of love requires 365 days a year. Fear not. Do not be afraid. And so we want to take a few minutes and look at the ways, and these are just a few of the many, many ways that cause us to start creating some distance. Some distance from that feeling of love and feeling one with all creation. Some distance from feeling totally connected to our source. From distance from feeling whole and attuned to our innate wholeness. That any time there is something cut off, we want to tend to that so that we can take it to the light, tend and befriend those fears and what's missing and what we don't know, so that the love can flow again. So when we begin to notice, and it happens in subtle ways, there's a story that I love that I've shared before about a little girl who went up to her mom one day and she said, "Mom, how did human beings get here? Where did they come from?" And her mom said, "Oh, honey, well, you see, God made Adam and Eve had children, and their children had children, and that's where all people came from. We came from Adam and Eve, and God created them." A little bit later, she saw her dad, and she said, "Dad, where do all people come from?" And he said, "Well, honey, that's easy." He said, "It's part of an evolutionary process that many years ago there were monkeys, and humans evolved from monkeys." Well, she's kind of confused, and so she goes back to Mom and says, "Mom, I don't understand. You said humans came from God and Adam and Eve, and Daddy said humans came from monkeys." And her mom thought for just a moment. She said, "Oh, honey, that's not difficult. You see, I was telling you about my side of the family, and he was telling you about his side of the family." And it's common to have differences of opinion. As a matter of fact, differences of opinion are a very healthy thing. That great and greater understanding can come out of seeking to understand differing opinions. Differences are ordinary. but discord and divisiveness need not be. You see, so often these differences lead to I'm right, you're wrong. I am better than, they are less than. I am following God, they are not. You see, so often these differences begin to create estrangement, a bigger and bigger distance between us. And when these differences are charged and amplified in the larger society, that's when mistrust, brutality, oppression, and war, it's all born out of these differences that would lead us to make the other an enemy, to make the other the matter with us, to create distrust, divisiveness, fear. And so how do we deal with that? Many of you probably have heard of Dr. Seuss, his funny rhymes and children's book, but you may or may not know that when he was 80 years old, by the time he was 80, Dr. Seuss had sold over 100 million books. But at 80 years old, he released another book. It was called the Butter Battle Book. And in this book, there are two groups. There are the Zooks and the Ukes. Now, they look the same. They're one people, if you will, these Zooks and Ukes, but they dress differently. One group wear blue and the other group wear orange. Grandpa, who's a Uke, is talking to his grandson, and this is how the story unfolds. And Grandpa tells the young Zook, in every Zook house and in every Zook town, every Zook eats his bread with the butter side down. Now, the Ukes ate their bread with the butter side up, and the Zooks ate their bread with the butter side down. And so he is saying a Zook's way of buttering bread is a horribly thing. Every Zook must be watched, that there's kinks in his soul. And so, as the story goes, hence the name of the book, the Butter Battle Book, one group butters their bread side up, and one eats it with the butter side down. But what begins to happen is they live on this difference causes them to create a wall, and they live on different sides of wall. And then what starts with just a slingshot being fired to kind of taunt the other side turns into an escalating arms race, a weapons race, and they keep one-upping each other. And then what finally happens, what starts with a slingshot, the weapons become lethal. They move underground. And then it says, we've thought up a gadget that's newer than new. It is filled with mystery, moo like a moo, and can blow all those Zooks clear to Kalamazoo. And so at an impasse with a general on each side, they're now poised to drop a pink bomb that will obliterate all of them. And at the end, as they're holding that bomb and the young grandson is watching, this is what the last page says in its entirety. Grandpa, I shouted, be careful, old G. Who's going to drop it, will you or will he? Be patient, said Grandpa. We'll see. We will see. And then there's one more page that's left blank. Dr. Seuss never ended another book like that with a blank page, but it speaks volumes. Because it says, how will you resolve this story? How do our differences create divisiveness? How do we allow anything to cut us off from the presence of love? How do our perspectives create distance? How do our perspectives create distance between us and our wholeness, us and our God, us and one another? And you know, we can look at this book and we can say, yeah, but that's kind of a funny story. It's just about buttered bread. But it's not about, what about those people who believe in things that are terribly wrong? I mean, if you look at the state of our country right now, under our current president, approximately half of our country believes that our current president is a man of God. And approximately the other half of our country believes that our current president is a man of devil or evil. Now, you don't have that kind of difference escalate unless something is being called forth. And how, you know, when we're in such disagreement, the question becomes, who are we an instrument of? Because before we can stand for anything that is right, as we work to change policy, as we work to bring about the beloved community, as Dr. King said, we need to find our soul force. We need to find our way back to a love that is bigger. And when you're held in a love that is bigger, you can be a presence for healing. You can be a presence for seeking to understand. You can be a presence for change because you have connected to a love that is bigger. It was really interesting this week as I was thinking about this, because I had a high number of Zoom calls and calls this week, and a couple of them just really touched my heart and spoke to me. One was from a young man who's in his mid-30s. He's joined us online as a viewer. And this young man in his mid-30s has grown up in a Catholic home and very devout home. And as he reached out to me privately, he was saying, you know, I've known for a long, long time that I'm a gay man, but I just haven't been able to accept it. And I'm at a point in my life that I need to accept it, or I just need to die. And so he reached out, and as he was talking to me, he began to talk about, and he said, you know, my family are Catholic, and you know, they're probably going to disown me. I don't want to bring shame to our family. I don't want to feel less than. And I could just hear in his words, I could hear him armoring up. He was saying that, you know, recently with the politics, and we stand on different sides, there's already so much division being created. In his mind, he was saying, you know, there's already so much of a gap between us that this is just going to create a gap that we'll never get over. And he was really wanting to know, how do I go on without the love of my family? And what we begin to talk about is unconditional love. You see, unconditional love means that love is bigger than any condition. That there is no obstacle, there are no differences, there is no situation where love is not present. And so what we begin to talk about is, how could he love bigger? How could he tend and befriend his own fears? Because you know what was at the root of it? He was afraid of hurting them. He was afraid of being rejected. He was afraid of all of those things. And when he really began to connect with his own fear and just broke down and cried, he then was in a space where I said, you know, you can connect with a love that is bigger. You may not know how to love. Sometimes our love can fail. Our bonds of love can be broken, but love that is God never fails. That's why it is called unconditional love. And so as he began to realize that as he could relax into that love, as he could stay connected to the love of God, that it really, whatever happened outside of that, yes, it may hurt. Yes, he may work to change it. But what was most important is, could he take his cares to the light? Could he tend and befriend his own hurt and ache? And could he thereby let love flow again? And I'm happy to tell you he can. Another situation, similar situation, an individual had been in a little bump up, a little car accident. And as a result of that, needed to go to the emergency room to get some x-rays taken. And in the course of taking those x-rays, it turned out that they were just fine from the automobile accident. However, something that may not be so fine was detected. And in talking to that person, who of course was completely shocked, once again, how do you take those uncertainties to the light? How do you tend and befriend that part of you that is afraid, so that the love that is love, that is love, can call you into your faithful action steps? You see, there's no just one faithful action step. We're being called to tend and befriend our fears. That if we are ever going to be the love that we're created to be, it's bringing mindfulness to anything that seems to cut us off from our God, from our worth and worthiness, from one another. Anything that would cut us off from our sense of well-being. Because perfect love is wholeness. That's something that you can feel. Richard, would you give me that song? I want to wrap this up with a true story. In the early 1900s, many infants died in hospital institutions, and the reasons were really unknown. Often on the admissions card, when a little frail infant would come in, literally the words hopeless would appear because everything that they knew to do had failed. And there was a famous physician from Boston. His name was Dr. Fritz Talbot. He had unusual success with these infants that were coming in as hopeless. That after he would write on the chart what to do for those children, one of the station nurse noticed that a lot of his patients, that the children would begin to move a little more, that they would begin to take in more food or milk, and that their color would look better, that the children would begin to thrive. And so the station nurse went to Dr. Fritz and said, would you please tell me, what do you write? What is it that you do? And what he was writing on his paper was Old Anna. And he pointed in the nursery, and there was a matronly looking woman sitting in the corner in a rocking chair, and she was rocking those hopeless infants. You see, when everything else had failed, old Anna knew that those children had purpose. She knew that those little infant babies belonged. She knew that the Spirit of God is the Spirit in all creation. And she held those babies in love, in a sense of belonging. And they were being healed and restored. You see, love says, reveal what needs to be revealed and heal what needs to be healed. It's simple, but it's not easy. Notice your fears. Notice what would separate you from your wholeness, from love, from feeling connected to anyone or anything. It doesn't mean you have to like them. It doesn't mean you have to agree with them. That's a different thing than loving the same Spirit, that there's one Spirit that flows through all creation. And I can see that in you and honor that in you and still disagree with behaviors or beliefs. But I do it from a place of love. And so we have some words to a familiar melody that is a practice this week that says, I breathe the breath of God. I carry the Spirit of God. I am the love of God. I live in God. You breathe the breath of God. You carry the Spirit of God. You are the love of God. You live in God as God. That's how we fear not. I breathe the breath of God. I carry the Spirit of God. I am the love of God. I live in God. You breathe the breath of God. You carry the Spirit of God. You are the love of God. You live in God. We turn our awareness within. And the truth that there is one power and one presence. There is one Spirit that animates all creation. We call that love. It is love because it is an expression of the source. It is love because it has everything it needs to fulfill its expressing itself. It is love because it has the nurturance, it has the resources, it has all that it needs from within to fulfill its capacity to express itself. fear not. Those words need not come from an angel that appears before you, for those words come from your inner voice of truth, which is just as much a voice of an angel. The inner voice of truth and wisdom says, do not be afraid, but tend to your fears, offer them up, bring them to the light. Ask whatever needs to be healed, heal what needs to be healed, reveal what needs to be revealed. And help me to tend and befriend my fears. Help me to realize what's really going on, what's really creating this distance, this feeling cut off, this being incomplete. I don't have to fix it. Just let me be aware of it and offer it up. I don't want to block love. I don't want to block my own wholeness. I don't want to block the truth of my being. Let it flow and let it show. I let love. I breathe the breath of God. I carry the Spirit of God. I am the love of God. I live in God. And you breathe the breath of God. You carry the Spirit of God. You are the love of God. You live in God. This week, my friends, I think the most important thing that we can do is to fear not. And that doesn't mean that you're not going to be afraid, but don't let it stop there. Notice it. Bring it to the light. And then let faithful action follow. Tend and befriend. Be real about what is it that's disturbing your soul. What is disturbing your capacity to feel whole? What is disturbing your ability to feel connected? What is disturbing your presence of love and peace and joy and hope? Reveal what needs to be revealed. Heal what needs to be healed. Let me tend and befriend it. And then let it go and let love. 'Cause you are the Spirit of God. You carry the breath of God. And you are the love of God. You live in God. You live in God. I want to thank you this week for being willing to fear not, to tend those fears. Starting on the 15th, I'm going to be lighting a candle every night at 8 o'clock. I invite you, wherever you are at 8 p.m., your 8 p.m., to join in to light your candles. Next Sunday, if you're in Western North Carolina, if you're in this area, we'll be live streaming as normal, but at our normal time, 11 a.m. But outside, starting at 11:30, Richard and our band and Kat and Mary Kay and Pat Cardwell, some of our singers are going to be outside and going to be sharing some Christmas music. It's a great time for you to come by if you're in the area and pick up your holiday service kit. So you'll have the things for our Christmas Eve service, the burning bowl, the white stone ceremony. We also want to really reach out and send just a huge note of gratitude to our growing virtual audience. That, this one blessing that has come through this pandemic is just teaching all of us that we can connect in different ways. So I want to welcome those of you that are considering this your spiritual home. And if you want one of these holiday service kits, just give us a call or an email, as many of you already have. So we'll be getting those in the mail this week. Well, before we're going to have our final song that is a beautiful Christmas song by the whole congregation, but before that, let's see, we didn't get the donkey video yet, right? So we're going to have a donkey video for you next week, coming soon. So I want to share with you, going back in time, we have a beautiful song of our congregation singing, and then we're going to sing out the peace song together from a previous service. May you know that you are the love of God this week. Thank you.
All right, because it's Christmas time and we get to sing these songs together. Lift your voice. Silver bells, silver bells, it's Christmas time in the city and the country. Silver bells, silver bells, soon it will be Christmas Day. City sidewalks, busy sidewalks, dressed in holiday style. In the air there's a feeling of Christmas. Children laughing, people passing, meeting smile after smile, and on every street corner you'll hear, sing it out, silver bells, silver bells, it's Christmas time in the city. Ring-a-ling, hear them ring. Soon it will be Christmas Day. Play it, Richard. Play it, Dave. Yeah. String of street lights, even spotlights, blinking bright red and green, as the shoppers rush home with their treasure. Hear the snow crunch, see the kids punch. This is Santa's big day, and above all this hustle, you'll hear silver bells, silver bells, it's Christmas time in the city. Ring-a-ling, ting-a-ling, soon it will be Christmas Day. That last line. Soon it will be Christmas Day. You sound beautiful. You may be seated. Thank you so much. Wow.